In the past video, I addressed the visit of President Assad to Moscow and the general political mood in the region, which is heading to appeasement and rapprochement thanks to the Russian and Chinese diplomacy, bringing foes to the negotiation table, such as Iran and Saudi Arabia and Syria with Turkey. However, I also mentioned that Israel and the neocons in Washington aren't happy with the current situation and the possible Israeli attack on Lebanon based on a false allegation. I'm gonna show you a video of Ned Price. He is the spokesperson of U.S. State Department, and I mean, sometimes it's quite crazy, man. It's what they say is like, how can they say such things with a straight face? Basically, Ned Price says that no one in the region did as much as the United States. I'm paraphrasing him, to stabilize the region. It's like no one did as much as harm to the Middle East than the United States. No one. In terms of their wars, direct wars, proxy wars, regime change wars, colored revolutions, destabilization efforts, everything that happened in the past decades, there were either the Brits or the Americans or the Israelis involved. I mean, that's the truth. How can he come out and say something like this? I can't really. It's amazing. Just check.
America is deeply engaged with the Middle East. We have, I think, demonstrated results in those efforts to leave a region that is more stable, is more integrated, is more prosperous. No country on earth has done more to help build a more stable, a more integrated region.
So Ned Price is like lying with a straight face to us, and I truly don't know how to feel about it. It's so arrogant the way he speaks about this case, and I'm, however, happy that lots of leaders in the region now, they see and believe that the United States is not necessarily a force of good, and now China is brokering such an important deal between China and Saudi Arabia. This will have a positive reflection on the region. It will decrease the chances of war unless Israel wages a war in the coming weeks. And I'm very concerned about that because Israel is very unhappy with this deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And at the same time, Netanyahu is facing a real crisis. It's not just like talk. It's a real crisis. What's happening nowadays in Israel? He's cornered and he's feeling desperate. And in my estimation, Netanyahu, he will export the internal crisis or try to finish the internal crisis by exporting or trying to wage war on the neighboring countries. And here, it's either gonna be in Lebanon or on Syria. And I think it's gonna be in Lebanon. And today, I was just reading this article on the BBC. It says, today, Israel believes roadside bombing suspect crossed from Lebanon. So there was a roadside bombing, and now Israel is accusing Hezbollah or someone from Lebanon to cross the border and plan this bombing. I think Netanyahu may launch a military operation against Lebanon in the coming weeks. Netanyahu is very desperate, and this report is part of the public opinion and preparation for war. Just in my opinion. I hope I'm wrong. I don't wish that there would be war, but this is a very serious possibility. In the same context, Professor Mohammad Marandi shares my concern on the possibility of an Israeli offensive on Lebanon during his interview with George Galloway.
Chinese President Xi, when he traveled to Saudi Arabia, in his meetings with Saudi leaders, it was discussed, or the issue of mediation was discussed between them. And after he returned to China and before President Raisi's trip to Beijing, a message was sent to Iran about the idea of mediation, what the Saudis and the Chinese discussed. When President Raisi went on his state visit to Beijing, during the negotiations, he agreed to have the Chinese mediate, and the rest we all know. Last week, the two sides were able to come to an agreement and reestablish ties with one another. So I think that was a major plus for China, because it showed Chinese behavior to be very different from that of the United States. While the Chinese are trying to decrease tensions and to decrease hostility, the Americans have, in the eyes of most people, I would assume, in our region, they have been after division and after exploiting divisions and increasing potential rifts between the different countries. And I think the Chinese have actually, by behaving almost the exact opposite of that of the United States, they've made the Americans look even worse. And of course, because of this rapprochement, I think there's a good opportunity that there will be more movement with regards to Syria. The Saudis in the past, as you know, were supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, as well as in Iraq, along with a host of other countries, NATO countries and non-NATO countries. Now, hopefully, there is talk, or the Saudis have said that they wish to change the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Syria, so that's good news. They have been making some positive noise on Lebanon, and hopefully the Saudis will find the will to bring about peace in Yemen as well. So I think that this could be a first step to decrease tensions across the region, which of course will make both Americans both Americans and the Israeli regime very unhappy. The Israeli regime is looking for a means to distract public opinion away from problems at home. On the one hand, the divisions in Israeli society are clear for everyone to see. People have seen the protests. Israel is a very right-wing society, but the current regime led by Netanyahu is extremely right-wing, so right-wing that even the Europeans and especially the Americans are criticizing it, something that we don't often see. And the attacks on Syria, for example, that we've seen over the past couple of weeks since the earthquake, they were carried out to distract attention from the problems at home. And I think that what the Israeli regime right now is contemplating with regards to Lebanon is probably the same, because if they carry out an attack on Lebanon, then they will definitely bring about war. Hezbollah will not stand indifferent, and the Israelis have already lost the war to Hezbollah less than 2 decades ago. But I think Netanyahu really is so desperate to remain in power and to distract public opinion away from the problems that he has at home, even though I think he has the majority, he has a support base that could keep him in power, but I think he needs to distract attention away from this, and he's willing to do anything. To say that a Zionist has principles is a bit problematic, but in his case, he has no principles whatsoever.
To further elaborate on the issue, I hosted Lebanese journalist Dr. Marwa Osman, who is based in Lebanon, and she followed this case quite closely. Marwa, thank you very much for being my guest again on Syriana Analysis. And I would like to start with you with this simple question. Maybe it's simple, but it looks like really complicated what's happening in Israel. What is really happening there? Is there really a possibility of a civil war? And who are the conflicting sides?
Well, it's truly very interesting what's going on inside the Israeli occupation Kevork, because it is something unprecedented for the settlers of the occupation that they witnessed for the first time. I think we're entering week number 13 of the protests, and just a few days ago I was reading on the Israeli media that they started arresting the protesters, and we're talking here about the only democracy in the Middle East, by the way. But what's going on is unprecedented. It is very concerning for the leaders of the Israeli occupation. Namely, if you hear what the President Herzog keeps saying, he keeps mentioning that Israel is on the verge of an explosion, Israel is on the verge of a fire, and if that fire happens, the entire house will come down on the heads of everyone. So yes, a civil war is a big possibility at the moment because simply you have the tools for it. You have settlers who are armed to the teeth inside the Israeli occupation, and you just need one bullet, and the streets of the occupied Tel Aviv, Haifa, Jaffa, all of these Palestinian cities will turn into a battle zone of Israelis fighting one another. Now the issue is the people really don't understand what's going on. They don't know why there are protests against Netanyahu, despite the fact that he won a majority that allowed him to make a government. But the issue that the people don't know is that he was able to win the elections because he made a new alliance with what the Israelis believe are extremists. We're talking about Ben Gvir and we're talking about Smotrich, who are people who have been previously arrested inside of Israel as being extremists who call for violence. So the Israelis themselves have arrested and condemned these people, and now these people are found as leaders of the new government of the Israeli occupation, who are direct allies of Netanyahu. So the people who voted for Netanyahu to begin with and allowed him to gain the votes to become a prime minister again, they are now in the streets alongside what is called the Israeli left, which who are led by basically Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, and these were the people who are running the government before this one. So this is called the opposition. Added to that, the people who already voted for Netanyahu, who now look at this new coalition that Netanyahu is dealing with, and they see a devastation, they see a future of devastation for their colonial settlers, and they don't like it, they don't accept it, and they are in the streets demanding the absolute collapse of this government. But on the other side is what the media is not really talking about, because this is the first time we also see that the Israeli media and the Western media focusing on the protesters' side, because it seems somehow, and I've read in a couple of Israeli media, that the Biden administration is actually siding with the protesters. They don't want to see Netanyahu continue this government with Ben Gvir and Smotrich. So by reading the Israeli media, you could see that for the first time in history, there is real concern for not only a political strife, but also a civil disobedience that would end up into a street fight between Israelis themselves. Now, the other side, which the media was not focusing on, is the extremists, the conservative parties inside of Israel that are led by Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who see nothing but blood in front of them. If you read their comments on social media, if you read their publications in their newspapers, you see how they are actually labeling the Israeli left as murderers, as they are traitors, labeling them as people who should be killed. So we are talking about a near explosion inside of the Israeli community that they have never witnessed before. They did have some sort of clashes in the decades before now, but never something that looks like this. Added to that, they have been gaining a lot of momentum outside the Israeli occupation itself, in Europe, in the US. The number of protests that are going against Netanyahu's government in the West is also increasing a lot, which also brings way of how the foreign policy of the Western world, Europe and the US, are dealing with this. At the first couple of weeks, we didn't see any regime in the West siding with a certain political party against the other inside of Israel. But now, no, we've seen this siding with the left, which was translated, oddly enough, into the Arab regimes in the region who cut their ties with Netanyahu. Namely, we're talking about Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, who cancelled a visit for Netanyahu that was supposed to happen inside of the UAE. And they said that they are concerned about what's going on inside of the Israeli occupation. That is ironic, but that is is what's happening. And I know for sure that if this is what's coming out of the Arab regimes that actually ran to normalize with the Israeli occupation, then most definitely they already had the green card to do so from the United States of America, or else they wouldn't do it. So it is unprecedented. It is, yes, very high. It's a tension that's gaining momentum. It is very possible that we will see clashes on the streets between Israelis themselves.
In parallel with these protests, there was a side road bomb that occurred in Israel, and the Israeli army claims that someone from Lebanon infiltrated to Israel and planted the bomb. So the fingers are pointed at Hezbollah, apparently. What are the details of this claim? Is it true or not? And do you think Netanyahu is looking for justification to wage a war on Lebanon based on this report to export his internal crisis to the region?
Well, let's start with the last first. No, I don't think that there will be an exporting of the tensions, because it's not within his own hands. Because if you look at how the Israeli occupation army is dealing with the protests, you see that the leaders of the army are actually siding with the protesters, not with Netanyahu himself. There are multiple of events that happened to a point that at one point, one military pilot refused to take Netanyahu on board his helicopter and told him that if he wants to move from point A to point B, he should either walk or take his own car. So we're talking about a level of tension that is not seen before at many levels, especially at the level of the army. So if Netanyahu wanted to start something, he would need the army behind him, and the leadership of the army at the moment is not standing behind Netanyahu. That's to end it right here. No, there will not be a war. But the alleged explosion or infiltration, or we only heard that from the media, that it is coming from the Israelis themselves, and the people who announced it are people who are really close to Netanyahu. I think he was trying to maybe create some sort of an event that would shock the internal Israeli occupation settlers and would push them to stop the protests. But I think he failed utterly, because nothing happened. No one mentioned anything on the Lebanese border. You know how Lebanon is, it's a very small country. The villages are inhabited by thousands of people. Nothing really hides in Lebanon, and no one reported anything. No one reported infiltration. The Lebanese army did not report infiltration. The UN did not report any infiltration, because usually this is how it happens. Either the Lebanese army catches someone trying to infiltrate and arrests him, or the UN does and they give him back to the Lebanese army, or the Israeli entity and the UN UNIFIL forces also find something and then they issue out a statement. But this time it was only the Israeli side that is allegedly saying that a security incident occurred on the border, on the northern border of Palestine with Lebanon, but they didn't actually pinpoint anyone. They did not say Hezbollah did it. But the media said Hezbollah did. I'm talking about the official statement here. But from the Lebanese side, neither Hezbollah, neither the Lebanese army, nor anyone else either claimed responsibility or even said that they knew anything about it. And knowing the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, if they do something, they never hide, because they consider any event that they get involved in as a moment of pride in front of their community, to boast their power in front of their community and in front of the regional regimes as well, to show that they are capable of defending their land. But this time, nothing of that sort happened. So if you read the Lebanese media, you could see even the media that is against Hezbollah in Lebanon is saying that this is most probably some sort of a maneuver by the Israeli government, who is led by Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, to try and deviate the attention from the internal Israeli political hysteria right now into something on the northern border, to try and raise concerns and worries within the communities inside of the Israeli occupation and make them surrender or succumb to whatever the government wants. Now, what happened is, after that statement was released, we had another statement by Netanyahu saying that there was some sort of a political solution that was brought about by the opposition, and that his coalition refuses it, refuses to even discuss it because they don't like it. They don't want to see it happen. And by saying so, if the people don't know yet what's the real problem inside of the Israeli occupation right now, is that the new government, which is led by these what are known as far right, because if you ask me, everyone is far right inside of Israel, but this group of far right politically affiliated far right groups inside of Israel decided to mediate, or to basically control the judicial system inside of the country. How would they do that? By amending laws that would allow the rabbis, the religious power inside of the Israeli occupation, to take control of the judicial system. You can imagine what that would mean. And that would, by default, by the way, turn it from what they call it as a democracy. The protesters are saying that they are defending a democracy from becoming a theocracy. But if you know the history of Israel, you know they are already a theocracy. But this will be crystal clear that there is a definite engagement between the religious rabbis, the religious power of the Israelis, with the judicial power, which is the civil judicial power in the country, in the entity. But that is the main problem. And now what the opposition is putting on the table is some sort of a compromise, even for themselves. But Netanyahu refused, and I think this refusal, coming with the statement about what's going on the border with Lebanon, or what is allegedly going on the border with Lebanon, they were some sort of a political maneuver by Netanyahu. But according to the media that we are following, and the social media accounts of somehow influential left Israeli occupation settlers, it proves that Netanyahu's plot has failed, and the protesters seem adamant on bringing down this government.
Marwa, I mean, I'm very, very impressed. You presented in 15 minutes what it could take me 2 days of research and to understand what's going on in Israel, and especially this case now, the alleged infiltration of someone from Lebanon. I was searching for it. I'm really, really thankful for you. Thank you very much for being my guest again on Syriana Analysis. I'm sure the audience would also appreciate your insight, and I would definitely host you again to follow up if Netanyahu loses his mind and wages a war on Lebanon, which you rule out that possibility. I would never rule out something from Netanyahu himself, but I think the conditions that you mentioned may hinder his attempt to export the internal crisis to the region. So thank you so much, Marwa, again.
My pleasure. I'm always at your service, and thank you for hosting me.
Guys, Marwa Osman's Twitter account is in the description below. Go and hit the follow for her. And also, if you like to support my independent journalistic work and commentary work, you can become a patron. Link in the description below, and see you next time.